How are you guys doing? It is Monday, November 23rd out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to take you through football over the weekend, starting with college football, transitioning to the NFL, and of course finishing off with international football, or as Americans call it, soccer. But jumping into it real quickly, starting with Thursday's matchup, 25th ranked Tulsa was able to beat Tulane. I kind of already covered that. Jumping into Saturday's early games, first ranked Alabama was able to beat unranked Kentucky 63-3. In this game, Alabama quarterback Mac Jones would throw for 2 touchdowns, throwing for 230 yards. Jason McClellan would finish with 99 yards and 10 carries and a touchdown. Najee Harris would finish with 83 yards and 13 carries and 2 touchdowns. Roydell Williams would finish with a touchdown and 30 yards, and Brian Robinson Jr. would also finish with a touchdown. They would end up having, and Bryce Young would end up going 2 for 2, throwing for a touchdown as well. They'd have 3 touchdowns through the air and 5 on the ground, and they would have an additional touchdown as well. On the defensive side of the ball, Christian Harris would finish with 11 tackles and a sack as well. Big win for Alabama as they are now 7-0 on the season so far. Continuing on down the line, third-ranked Ohio State was able to beat division rival and undefeated at the time Indiana. They were able to beat them 42-35 in a game where Indiana almost came back. In the fourth quarter, Ohio State was originally up 42-21. 2 touchdowns by Indiana early on would give them a chance to come back, but they were just unable to do so. For Ohio State, their elite quarterback Justin Fields to complete 18 of his 30 passes, throwing for 300 yards. He threw 2 touchdowns. He threw for 3 picks. He also ran for 78 yards and a touchdown on the ground to give him 378 total yards with 3 touchdowns. And then, of course, he didn't lose any fumbles, but he did have 3 interceptions. But of course, big game overall for the Ohio State Buckeyes. On the ground game, Master Teague III would finish with 169 yards and 26 carries and 2 touchdowns. Garrett Wilson would be the leading receiver for Ohio State as he had 169 yards and 7 receptions. For Indiana, their quarterback Michael Penix Jr. would throw for 491 yards, 5 touchdowns, and a pick. He threw for all 5 touchdowns. But the team as a whole had 16 carries and -1 rushing yards. So, of course, big game for Ohio State's run defense, as the only way the Indiana was able to move the ball was on the ground. And, of course, their only interception would be going to Shashawn Wade, who did end up getting a pick 6. Big win for Ohio State. They're now 4-0 on the season, as I believe they're going to retain their rank status. I'm continuing on through college football, just showing you what's going on, just going on down the line. Also, 6th ranked Florida was able to beat unranked Vanderbilt 38-17. Kyle Trask threw for 3 touchdowns on the day. 7th ranked Cincinnati remains undefeated after beating unranked UCF 36-33. I think this game would eventually go all the way down to the wire. Final touchdown will go to UCF as they were down by a bit, but Cincinnati's 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter would help them go above after they were down 25-22 at the end of the third. With this win, Cincinnati is 8-0, 6-0 in their conference, and with this loss, UCF is now 5-3. BYU ranked at 8th, undefeated, was able to beat North Alabama 66-14. Zach Wilson was able to throw for 4 touchdowns on the day. 19th ranked Northwestern remains undefeated after beating 10th ranked Wisconsin 17-7. Wisconsin's only touchdown coming in the first half, but great defense as the game went on. For Northwestern, their quarterback Peyton Ramsey would throw for 2 touchdowns as he threw for 203 yards. Continuing on down the line, 11th ranked Oregon was able to beat unranked UCLA 38-35. UCLA scored a touchdown in the fourth to bring it close, but it'll be Tyler Show throwing for 3 touchdowns to help Oregon remain undefeated. They're now 3-0 on the season. 13th ranked Georgia was able to beat unranked Mississippi State 31-24. JT Daniels led the way, throwing for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns as he's starting to emerge as the new starting quarterback candidate at UGA. 18th ranked Oklahoma was able to beat their in-state rival 14th ranked Oklahoma State 41-13. Spencer Rattler was able to throw for 301 yards as Ramondre Stevens also able to add 141 yards on the ground. Coastal Carolina at 15th remains undefeated after beating Appalachian State 34-23. 17th ranked Iowa State was able to beat unranked Kansas State 45-0. Kansas State now 4-4 on the season, and Iowa State is now 6-2. 20th ranked USC remains undefeated after beating unranked Utah 33-17. Keaton Slavis, sorry if I mispronounced your name. He had 264 yards and 2 passing touchdowns through the air. All 21st ranked Liberty was able to pick up their first loss of the season as they lost to NC State 15-14. This game would end up going down to the very end. This would go to the last and final possession. The final touchdown was scored by North Carolina State in the fourth quarter after being down 14-9. Their touchdown and failed 2-point conversion. Zonovan Knight would put them above. And with this loss, Liberty is now 8-1 after picking up their first loss of the season. North Carolina State, I believe, would still be still unranked, but I think they'll be ranked following this. 23rd ranked Auburn was also able to beat Tennessee 30-17 after being down 7-0 in the first. They were able to score 10 points in the second, third, and fourth quarter to get them their 5th win of the season. And additionally, other games are postponed, but those are the games that were actually able to be played over the weekend for college football. Jumping out to the NFL, just to show you what's going on over there, as Week 11 is wrapping up, one more game to be played in Week 11. But starting off with the early games on Sunday, the New Orleans Saints were able to beat their in-state rival, the Atlanta Falcons, 24-9. As the Falcons they just kind of let control of this game go. Matt Ryan was sacked 8 times by the New Orleans Saints defense. But starting off for the Atlanta Falcons, their elite quarterback Matt Ryan would complete 19 of his 37 passes, throwing for 232 yards and 2 interceptions. Through the air, their leading receiver was Calvin Ridley, who had 90 yards on 5 receptions. Their elite running back Todd Gurley II would have 26 yards on 8 carries. He also had 3 yards on 1 reception, giving him 29 total yards of offense on the day. Their elite wide receiver Julio Jones would finish with 39 yards on 2 receptions on 2 targets on the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Keanu Neal would lead the team in tackles. He had 8 of them on the day. Deion Jones would have 6 tackles and a sack on the day. Fosaid Alakun would finish with 5 tackles on the day. He also recovered a fumble as well. And looking at how the New Orleans Saints fared, their quarterback, or Taysom Hill, will get the start. Taysom Hill out of BYU, their all-purpose quarterback. Through the air, he finished with 233 yards, completing 18 of his 23 passes. He was also able to finish with 51 yards and 10 carries on the ground. That would give him 284 total yards of offense with 2 touchdowns. Alvin Kamara would finish with 45 yards and 13 carries and a touchdown. Latavius Murray would finish with 49 yards on 12 carries. Through the air, Michael Thomas, their elite wide receiver, would be their leading receiver. He had 104 yards on 9 receptions on the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Demario Davis would finish with 7 total tackles on the day. Taysom Hill would end up fumbling. That was his only turnover of the day. And continuing on, David Onyemata would finish with 3 tackles on the day. He had 2 sacks. Trey Hendrickson also had 2 sacks. Cameron Jordan, the defensive end, would finish with 4 tackles, and he had 3 sacks on the day. Big win for the New Orleans. And, of course, Marcus Williams and Janoris Jenkins would finish with interceptions. With this win, the New Orleans Saints are now 8-2. They are sitting at the top of the NFC South, as the Atlanta Falcons are now 3-7 with this loss. They're now sitting at the very bottom of the NFC South. Jumping out to Cleveland, the Cleveland Browns were able to get their 7th win of the season after beating the Philadelphia Eagles 22-17. This game will go all the way down to the wire, and it will be the Eagles who get the last score. But the Cleveland Browns were able to keep it at arm's length. The Eagles were able to bring it to within a scoring possession twice in the final quarter, but like I just said, the Cleveland Browns were able to keep them at arm's length. For the Philadelphia Eagles in this game, their starting quarterback Carson Wentz would complete 21 of his 35 passes, throwing for 235 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. Their leading rusher on the ground was Miles Sanders, who had 66 yards on 16 carries. He was also able to finish with 15 yards and 3 receptions through the day to give him 81 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver was Dallas Goedert, who finished with 77 yards on 5 receptions and a touchdown for the Eagles. On the defensive side of the ball, Alex Singleton would end up leading the team in tackles. He had 12 of them on the day. He was also able to pick up a sack and recover a fumble. Josh Sweat finished with 6 total tackles, and he also finished with a sack for the Philadelphia Eagles on the day. Same with Fletcher Cox. For the Cleveland Browns, their starting quarterback Baker Mayfield will complete 12 of his 22 passes, throwing for 204 yards. On the ground, he was also able to add 9 yards of offense. Their leading rusher was Nick Chubb, who finished with 114 yards and 20 carries. Nick Chubb finished with the only rushing touchdown of the day, as he finished with 11 yards and 13 carries. KhaDarel Hodge would be their leading receiver. He had 73 yards and 3 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Carl Joseph was able to recover a fumble to go along with his 3 tackles. Andrew Sendejo would lead the team in tackles. He had 7 total tackles on the day. And then just continuing on, Sion Takitaki would finish with a pick six on the day, a 50-yarder, and Denzel Ward would end up logging get another interception for the Cleveland Browns. With this loss, the Philadelphia Eagles are now 3-6-1. They still sit at the top of the NFC East, as every other team in the NFC East has a 3-7 record. And because of their tie with Cincinnati, they're technically half a game better in this season than the other teams in the NFC East. In the AFC North, the Cleveland Browns have overtaken the Baltimore Orioles for the second spot in the AFC North with a 7-3 record, especially coming off this win. Jumping to Baltimore, speaking of the AFC North, the Baltimore Ravens hosted the Tennessee Titans and lost in overtime. This game, like I said, went down to the very wire, but then it would be a Derrick Henry 29-yard run that would eventually win the game for the Tennessee Titans. For the Baltimore Orioles, their reigning MVP elite quarterback Lamar Jackson would complete 17 of his 29 passes, throwing for 186 yards, a touchdown, and an interception through the air. He was also able to finish with 51 rushing yards on 13 carries. That would give him a total of 237 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher was J.K. Dobbins with 70 yards on 15 carries and a touchdown. And through the air, their leading receiver was Mark Andrews, who had 96 yards on 5 receptions and a touchdown. Dez Bryant, in his first game back, was also able to log 28 yards on 4 receptions for the Ravens. On the defensive side of the ball, Patrick Queen was their leading tackle. He had 9 total tackles on the day. Matthew Judon was able to log a sack, same with Yannick Ngakoue, the 2 sacks on the day. And Tyus Bowser was able to log an interception for the Baltimore Ravens. For the Tennessee Titans, their starting quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, would complete 22 of his 31 passes, throwing for 259 yards. He was able to throw for 2 touchdowns and a pick. He also ran for 35 yards on 4 carries. That would give him a total of 294 yards of offense. Derrick Henry, their elite running back, would finish with 133 yards and 28 carries and a touchdown on the ground. He was also able to log -1 yards through the air, but he was still able to get 132 yards of total offense. Their leading receiver was Corey Davis, who had 113 yards on 5 receptions. A.J. Brown would finish with 62 yards on 4 receptions and a touchdown as well for the Titans. On the defensive side of the ball, Rashaan Evans would lead the team with 9 total tackles. Harold Landry III out of Boston College would finish with a sack on the day, the team's only sack. And Amani Hooker would log an interception for the team. And at the end of the day, with this win, the Tennessee Titans are 7-3 as the Ravens fall to 6-4. The Ravens are now sitting at 3rd in the AFC North, just below the Cleveland Browns, and right above the 2-7-1 Cincinnati Bengals. And right now, the Tennessee Titans are sitting in the 2nd place spot in the AFC South with a 7-3 record, the same as the Indianapolis Colts. But I believe the Indianapolis Colts hold a tiebreaker over the Titans for now. Jumping to Houston, the Houston Texans were able to host the New England Patriots, and they were able to beat them 27-20. And this game will go all the way down to the 4th quarter as the Texans, being up by 4, able to kick a field goal to put them up by a touchdown and keep them out of arm's length. For the New England Patriots, their starting quarterback, the elite Cam Newton, would complete 26 of his 40 passes, throwing for 365 yards and a touchdown. He was also able to log 6 yards on the ground and give him 371 total yards of offense to go with his 1 touchdown. Their leading rusher was Damian Harris, who had 43 yards and 11 carries and a touchdown, the only rushing touchdown for them. Their leading receiver was Damiere Byrd, who had 132 yards on 6 receptions and a touchdown for the team. James White, in addition to his 19 yards rushing, he was also able to add 64 yards through the air to give him 83 total yards of offense. On the defensive side of the ball, Adrian Phillips would lead the team with 7 total tackles by himself. Their elite cornerback, Stephon Gilmore, would finish with 6 tackles as well on the team for the day, And looking at how the Houston Texans fared, their elite starting quarterback, Deshaun Watson, would complete 28 of his 37 passes, throwing for 344 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the ground, he was also able to add 36 yards. That would give him a total of 380 yards of offense with 3 total touchdowns. And I think he didn't log a single turnover for the entire day. The leading receiver through the air was Brandon Cooks, who had 85 yards and 4 receptions. Jordan Atkins was able to log 83 yards and 5 receptions. Will Fuller V had 80 yards and 6 receptions. The 3 different receivers with 80 yards receiving on the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Justin Reed and Zach Cunningham would each lead the team with 9 total tackles. Justin Reed was able to log a sack and 3.5 total tackles for loss. Jonathan Greenard was able to log the other sack for Houston. J.J. Watt, their goated defensive end. He would finish with 2 tackles on the day. He'd have 1 tackle for loss and 4 passes defended on the day. And with this win, the Houston Texans jump up to 3-7, where they are now sitting 3rd in the AFC South behind the 7-3 Indianapolis Colts and the Tennessee Titans. And with this loss, the New England Patriots now drop to 3rd in the AFC East. with a 4-6 record. They are 2 games behind the Miami Dolphins and 3 games behind the Buffalo Bills so far this season in their first season without Tom Brady. Jumping to Jacksonville, the Jacksonville Jaguars hosted the undefeated Pittsburgh Steelers and lost 27-3. The Jaguars were actually leading after the first quarter, 3-0, but they were unable to score for the rest of the game in Pittsburgh, where they were just putting the hurt on Jacksonville. For Jacksonville, their starting quarterback, Jake Luton, would complete 16 of his 37 passes, completing less than 50% of his passes. He threw for no touchdowns. He threw for 4 interceptions. And then on the ground, James Robinson would be their leading rusher. He had 73 yards and 17 carries. DJ Chark Jr. would be the leading receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He had 41 yards and 4 receptions. And Jake Luton would end up also fumbling. That would give him 5, or he wouldn't, I don't think he lost it, but he still had 4 turnovers on the day. Their leading tackler was Joe Sherbert, who had 13 tackles on the day, half of a tackle for loss. They were unable to log a single sack as a team, but Daniel Thomas was able to log a 53-yard interception for the team, but it wasn't able to do much. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, their starting quarterback Ben Roethlisberger would complete 32 of his 46 passes, throwing for 276 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. On the ground, James Conner was their leading rusher. He had 89 yards and 13 carries. Benny Snell Jr. was able to log a rushing touchdown as he had 15 yards and 7 carries. Through the air, Deontay Johnson would be their leading receiver. He had 111 yards on 12 receptions. Chase Claypool and Eric Ebron were able to log touchdowns as well for the Pittsburgh Steelers. On the defensive side, Vince Williams and Minkah Fitzpatrick and Cameron Hayward each led the team with 5 tackles apiece on the team. Bud Dupree and Stephon Tuitt would lead the team they would end up with both of the team's sacks. And Ben Roethlisberger he was able to log a tackle after his interception throw. And through the air, Minkah Fitzpatrick, in addition to having 5 tackles on the day, he and 2 passes defended, he was able to log 2 interceptions on the day. And Terrell Edmonds, along with his 4 tackles and 2 passes defended, he was able to log 2 interceptions on the day. With this win, the Pittsburgh Steelers are still 10-0, sitting at the top of the NFC North. And with this loss, the Jacksonville Jaguars are 1-9. They are sitting at the very bottom of the AFC South, 2 games behind the third-place Houston Texans as of right now. Jumping to Washington, D.C., the Washington football team was able to beat the Cincinnati Bengals 20-9, as the Bengals were able to take the lead in the second quarter, but they were unable to score outside of the second quarter. For the Cincinnati Bengals, their former number 1 pick from the 2020 NFL draft, Joe Burrow, he would complete 22 of his 34 passes, throwing for 203 yards and a touchdown. He was also able to add 12 yards on the ground to give him 215 total yards of offense. No one on the rushing game, no one on the ground was able to run for more than 20 yards. But through the air, Tyler Boyd would be their leading receiver. He had 85 yards on 9 receptions. And their lead wide receiver, A.J. Green, would finish with 41 yards on 4 receptions and a touchdown on the day for the Bengals. On the defensive side of the ball, Von Bell would lead the team with 13 total tackles on the day. Carl Lawson was able to log a sack. Same with Khalid Kareem. They would have the 2 total sacks on the day for the Cincinnati Bengals. And Jesse Bates III was able to log an interception on the day. For the Washington football team, their starting quarterback, Alex Smith, in his second start back, was able to complete 17 of his 25 passes, throwing for 166 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. On the ground, he logged -3 yards and 3 carries to give him 163 total yards of offense to go with his touchdown and pick. Antonio Gibson would be the leading rusher for Washington. He had 94 yards on 16 carries and a touchdown. Through the air, Terry McLaurin finished with 84 yards on 5 receptions. And then on the ground, Ronald Darby was able to recover the fumble from Joe Burrow. Cameron Curl would lead the team in tackles as he had 9 total on the day. Ryan Kerrigan, Montez Sweat would finish with sacks on the day, same with Tim Settle. The team would finish with 4 total on the day, and Fabian Moreau would finish with an interception to go with his 2 tackles. With this win, the Washington football team is now sitting at the very bottom of the NFC East with a 3-7 record, which is the same as the New York Giants and the Dallas Cowboys, and they are still half a game out. They're half a game behind the NFC East leading Philadelphia Eagles as of right now. With this loss, the Cincinnati Bengals are sitting at the bottom of the AFC North with a 2-7-1 record, especially following this loss. They're 0-5-1 on the road so far this season. Jumping to Charlotte, the Carolina Panthers were able to completely blank the Detroit Lions, shutting them out 20-0 for the entirety of the game. For the Detroit Lions, their starting quarterback, Matt Stafford, would complete 18 of his 33 passes, throwing for 178 yards. Their future Hall of Fame running back Adrian Peterson was able to finish with 18 yards on 7 carries. Through the air, TJ Hawkinson would be their leading receiver with 68 yards on 4 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Jamie Collins Sr. would lead the team with 9 total tackles. Their elite cornerback, Jeff Okudah, would finish with 7 total tackles, one of them being for loss. John Pendency would finish with the only sack of the day for the Detroit Lions, and Desmond Trufant and Amani Oruwariye, sorry if I butchered your name. Both those players would end up with interceptions on the day for the Detroit Lions, where they were unable to convert any of them into scoring opportunities. For the Carolina Panthers, their starting quarterback P.J. Walker would complete 24 of his 34 passes, throwing for 258 yards, a touchdown, and 2 picks. He was able to log -2 yards on the ground to give him 256 total yards of offense to go with his touchdown and 2 picks. And he fumbled, but he didn't lose it. On the ground, their leading rusher was Mike Davis, who had 64 yards on 19 carries and a touchdown. Through the air, DJ Moore was their leading receiver with 127 yards on 7 receptions. Curtis Samuel finished with 70 yards on 8 receptions and the only receiving touchdown of the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Marquise Haynes, in addition to finishing with 2 tackles on the day, he was able to recover a fumble. Trey Boston led the team with 8 total tackles on the day. Brian Burns had 2 sacks on the day to go along with his 5 tackles. And with this win, the Carolina Panthers are now 4-7 in the NFC South. That is good enough to be third, and they are now half a game ahead of the Atlanta Falcons so far. And with this loss, the Detroit Lions are 4-6, sitting at the bottom of the NFC North, sitting at 4-6 with the Minnesota Vikings. But I think the Vikings hold the tiebreaker over the Detroit Lions. So now the Detroit Lions are now 4th in their division. Jumping out really quickly to Denver. The Denver Broncos were able to host and beat the Miami Dolphins 20-13, giving Tua Tagovailoa his first loss as someone that's played for the Miami Dolphins. This game, I mean, the Broncos basically held this game at arm's length for most of the game. They were leading 13-10, they were leading 20-10 at the end of the third quarter, and the Miami Dolphins were only able to score a field goal in the second half, that one being in the fourth quarter, to put them down by a touchdown. But the Broncos were in control of this game from the beginning to the end. For the Dolphins first, Ryan Fitzpatrick was able to complete 12 of his 18 passes, throwing for 117 yards and a pick. Tua Tagovailoa, the Dolphins' elite young quarterback, was able to complete 11 of his 20 passes, throwing for 83 yards and a touchdown. On the ground, Salvon Ahmed would finish with 43 yards on 12 carries. Ryan Fitzpatrick was also able to add 6 yards of rushing to go with his 123 total yards of offense. Through the air, Devontae Parker was their leading receiver, who had 61 yards off 6 receptions, and he caught the only receiving touchdown of the day for the Dolphins from Tua. On the defensive side of the ball, Eric Rowe was able to lead the team with 10 total tackles, and he was able to recover a fumble as well. Going on down the team, I don't think the team was able to log a single sack on the day, but Xavier Howard was able to get an interception to go with his 7 total tackles on the day and tackle for loss. For the Denver Broncos, their starting quarterback, Drew Lock, would complete 18 of his 30 passes, throwing for 270 yards. He also threw an interception, but he also ran for 23 yards to give him 293 total yards of offense. On the ground, also, their running back, Melvin Gordon III, would finish with 84 yards on 15 carries and 2 touchdowns. Also, Philip Lindsay would finish with 82 yards on 16 carries. Through the air, Tim Patrick was their leading receiver with 119 yards on 5 receptions. And then Justin Simmons was their leading tackler. He had 7 total tackles on the day. Malik Reed would finish with 6 tackles and 1.5 sacks on the day, with 2.5 for loss. Deshaun Williams would finish with 3 tackles and 2 sacks on the day. The team was able to log 6 total sacks on the day, and Justin Simmons was able to log an interception to go with this team leading 7 tackles on the day. With this win, the Denver Broncos are now 4-6 in the AFC West, which is good enough for third, right? Which is 2 games behind the Las Vegas Raiders and a game ahead of the Los Angeles Chargers. And with this loss, the Miami Dolphins are still sitting at third in the AFC East, a full game behind the Buffalo Bills and 2 games ahead of the New England Patriots. Continuing on, jumping to Los Angeles, the Chargers were able to beat the New York Jets 34-28. This would be another game that went down to the wire. The Jets would bring it to within a touchdown in the final quarter. They would end up logging a safety because that's how the Chargers would end the game. But the Chargers were able to keep the Jets at arm's length and make sure that the Jets remained winless through the first 11 weeks of the season. For the Jets, their starting quarterback Joe Joe Flacco would complete 15 of his 30 passes, throwing for 205 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Frank Gore, their future Hall of Fame running back, would finish with 61 yards on 15 carries and a touchdown. And LaMichael Pirine would finish with a rushing touchdown as well, finishing with 33 yards on the ground on 8 carries. Denzel Mims would be their leading receiver with 71 yards and 3 receptions. Brashad Perriman finished with 54 yards and 2 receptions and a touchdown. Chris Herndon also logged a receiving touchdown as well. Ashton Davis would lead the team in tackles. He had 12 of them. He also recovered 1 for fumble. Neville Hewitt and Harvey Lange would also finish with double-digit tackles, both logging 11 tackles each. Jordan Jenkins finished with 9 tackles, half of a sack, 2.5 in the backfield. The Jets as a team would finish with 3 sacks, and for the Los Angeles Chargers, their rookie quarterback Justin Herbert would complete 37 of his 49 passes, throwing for 366 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also logged 11 yards on the ground and given 377 total yards of offense. Kalen Ballage led the team with 44 yards and 16 carries. Keenan Allen was their leading receiver. He had 145 yards and 16 receptions and a touchdown. Mike Williams had 72 yards and 4 receptions and a touchdown. Hunter Henry also logged a receiving touchdown as well. On the defensive side of the ball, Rayshawn Jenkins and Kenneth Murray Jr. both led the team in tackles. They had 7 each. And Denzel Perryman would finish with the only sack of the game for the Chargers. And Keenan Allen, he would log the only fumble, but Tevon Campbell would finish with a pick 6, the only interception of the game. And of course, Tevon Campbell, with his 6-yard pick 6, is also able to finish with 4 total tackles and 2 total passes defended on the day. With this win, the Los Angeles Chargers are 3-7 in the AFC West. They are sitting at the bottom of the AFC West, a full game behind Denver. And with this loss, the New York Jets are 0-10, the only team without a win thus far in the season, and they are 4 full games behind the 4-6 New England Patriots on the season. Looking out to Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Colts hosted the Green Bay Packers and were able to beat them in overtime, and it would be a game-winning field goal to help seal it for the Colts, and it would be the Packers whose field goal in the 4th quarter would tie the game up and send it into overtime. This game was pretty close for the entirety of the game. In the very end, it came down to field goals as the Packers scored 28 of their 31 points in the first half. The Colts were able to come back, and they were able to secure this win. For the Green Bay Packers, first off, their goated quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, would complete 27 of his 38 passes, throwing for 311 yards, throwing for 3 touchdowns and a pick. On the ground, Aaron Jones would lead the team in rushing. He had 41 yards and 10 carries. Rodgers had 13 yards on the ground. That would give him 324 yards of total offense with his 3 touchdowns. Through the air, Devontae Adams would finish with 106 total yards of offense on 7 receptions with 1 touchdown on the day. Robert Tonyan was also able to log a touchdown reception, same with Jamal Williams. Aaron Rodgers also lost a fumble, so that would give him 2 turnovers to go with his 3 total touchdowns on the day. And Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Darius Shepard also lost fumbles. On the defensive side of the ball, Christian Kirksey would lead the team with 11 total tackles on the day. Darnell Savage would finish with 6 total tackles, and he also recovered a fumble. Kenny Clark finished with 6 tackles, and he was able to log a sack, the only sack of the day for Green Bay. And Christian Kirksey would end up finishing with the only interception of the day, in addition to leading Green Bay's defense in tackles. For the Indianapolis Colts, their starting quarterback Phillip Rivers would complete 24 of his 36 passes, throwing for 288 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. Their leading rusher was Jonathan Taylor, who had 90 yards on 22 carries. Through the air, Michael Pittman Jr. was their leading receiver, who had 66 yards on 3 receptions and a touchdown. Trey Burton also finished with a touchdown reception, same with Jack Doyle. Tavon Wilson, DeForest Buckner, and Darius Leonard were each able to recover a fumble for the team. Kenny Moore was able to finish with 10 total tackles on the day. He led the team. Darius Leonard, in addition to his recovered fumble, he was also able to finish with 6 tackles on the day. Rocky Sin finished with an interception. He finished with 4 tackles as well. With this win, the Indianapolis Colts, also Justin Houston locked the team's only sack of the day. With this win, the Indianapolis Colts are 7-3, and with the tiebreaker over the Tennessee Titans, they now sit atop the AFC South. And with this loss, the Green Bay Packers are 7-3, sitting on top of the NFC North, still with a 7-3 record, 2 games ahead of the 5-5 Chicago Bears so far this season. Speaking of the NFC North, jumping out to Minnesota, the Vikings hosted the Dallas Cowboys, and the Cowboys were able to beat them 31-28. This game would come down to the very end, and the final laugh would go to the Dallas Cowboys, who scored on a final touchdown from Dalton Schultz, a 2-yard touchdown that would put them above by a touchdown, a much-needed touchdown with a minute and a half left. For the Minnesota Vikings, starting off, their starting quarterback Kirk Cousins would complete 22 of his 30 passes, throwing for 314 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was also able to add 4 yards on the ground to give him 318 total yards of offense. Dalvin Cook on the ground was able to finish with 115 yards on 27 catches and a touchdown. Dalvin Cook through the air is also able to add 45 yards to give him 160 yards of total offense. Their leading receiver was Adam Thielen, who had 123 yards on 8 receptions and 2 touchdowns. Justin Jefferson out of LSU was also able to finish with 86 yards on 3 receptions and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, in addition to Kirk Cousins and Dalvin Cook losing fumbles, by the way, Eric Wilson was their leading defender. He had 9 total tackles on the day. Jaleel Johnson finished with 8 tackles and a sack. Their elite safety Harrison Smith would also finish with 8 tackles on the day. And the only sack of the day would end up going to Jaleel Johnson. And Eric Kendricks would log the team's only interception, and that would go with his 7 tackles on the day and 2 passes defended. For the Dallas Cowboys, their starting quarterback, Andy Dalton, would complete 22 of his 32 passes, throwing for 203 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. On the ground, Ezekiel Elliott would finish with 103 yards on 21 carries. And then through the air, he finished with 11 yards and an additional touchdown to give him 114 yards and a touchdown of total offense today. Tony Pollard finished with 60 yards on 5 carries. Their leading receiver was Amari Cooper, who had 81 yards on 6 receptions. CeeDee Lamb was able to log a receiving touchdown along with Dalton Schultz and Ezekiel Elliott, like I just said. On the defensive side of the ball, Leighton Vander Esch was able to finish leading the team with 12 total tackles on the day. Donovan Wilson finished with 9 tackles, half of a sack, and a fumble recovery. Jalen Smith finished with a sack in addition to his 7 total tackles on the day. DeMarcus Lawrence was able to finish with 4 tackles, half of a sack, and a recovered fumble. And with this win, the Dallas Cowboys are now 3-7. They are now sitting at 3rd in the NFC East. They have the same record as the Washington football team and the New York Giants, but because of tiebreakers, they're behind the Giants and ahead of the Washington football team. And the NFC North, with a record better than all of the teams in the NFC East, the Minnesota Vikings are sitting 3rd with a 4-6 record, with the same record as Detroit, but they hold the tiebreaker over them, so they're sitting in 3rd. And continuing on with the last game of the night, the Las Vegas Raiders were able to host the defending 2020 Super Bowl champs, the Kansas City Chiefs. And the Chiefs were able to beat the Raiders 35-31. This game was another game that went down to the wire. The last laugh would go to the Chiefs. A 22-yard touchdown from Travis Kelce from Patrick Mahomes at the very end would help put the Chiefs above and beyond. For the Las Vegas Raiders, starting off with their side, their starting quarterback Derek Carr would complete 23 of his 31 passes, throwing for 275 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. Josh Jacobs on the ground was able to finish with 55 yards and 17 carries and a touchdown. He was their leading rusher. Nelson Aguilar was their leading receiver, along with Darren Waller. Aguilar had 88 yards on 6 receptions and a touchdown. Darren Waller had 88 yards as well on 7 receptions and a touchdown as well. And Jason Witten was able to log the last touchdown of the day. He had 1 reception on 1 yard. On the defensive side of the ball for the Ravens, Jonathan Abram led the team with 10 total tackles. Nick Kwiatkowski finished with 9. The team logged no sacks as a team, but Trayvon Mullen was able to get an interception. Patrick Mahomes is 2nd of the year. And speaking of Patrick Mahomes, the elite quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs was able to complete 34 of his 45 passes, throwing for 348 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. He also added 16 yards on the ground to give him 364 total yards of offense. Clyde Edwards-Helaire would lead the team with 69 yards on 14 carries. He had 2 touchdowns. Le'Veon Bell also finished with 25 yards on 7 carries and a touchdown. For the team, through the air, Travis Kelce will be their leading receiver with 127 yards on 8 receptions and a touchdown. Tyreek Hill, their elite wide receiver, would finish with 102 yards on 11 receptions and a touchdown. Le'Veon Bell would also finish with 11 yards through the air to give him 36 yards of offense. On the defensive side of the ball, Anthony Hitchens, Bashad Breeland, and Damian Wilson would each finish with 6 total tackles individually. The Chiefs are not able to log a single sack, no sacks in the entire game, and Daniel Sorensen was able to get the only interception of the day for the Kansas City Chiefs. With this win, the Kansas City Chiefs sit atop the AFC West with a 9-1 record, and with this loss, the Las Vegas Raiders are now sitting third in the AFC West with a 6-4 record, 3 full games behind the reigning AFC West champs. That's what football is looking like as of right now, and as I kind of preview it, tonight's game will feature a matchup between the Los Angeles Rams and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Both teams have 3 losses on the season so far. The Rams are 6-3. The Buccaneers are 7-3. This game's going to be on at ESPN at 8:15. And last but not least, just taking you to the international circuit, just showing you what's going on in international soccer, because there's been a lot going on, and this is the return from the international break. Starting on Friday, PSG, the reigning French champs, were able to lose to AS Monaco 3-2. It will be Fabregas's penalty kick in the 84th minute that will put them above. PSG eventually went up 2-0 thanks to Kylian Mbappe's 2 first half goals. Volland would score 2 goals in the second half to tie it up. But like I said, Cesc Fabregas would put AS Monaco above PSG. With this win, PSG still they still lead the table in the French league by 2 points, which is less than a game. And AS Monaco is now sitting 5th in Ligue 1 with 20 points compared to PSG's 24 as they're moving up the league. That was the only big game from Friday. Jumping to Saturday, and I'll take you league by league. Starting off in the Premier League, Chelsea was able to beat Newcastle 2-0 off of an own goal from Newcastle. And then Tammy Abraham's 65th minute goal would end up putting Chelsea above. I'm looking at how Chelsea's faring. They're sitting 3rd in the Premier League through 9 matches played. They have 18 points in the table, tied with Leicester City. Tottenham Hotspur was able to beat Manchester City 2-0. Heung-min Son scoring in the 5th minute, and then Lo Celso scoring in the 65th minute in the second half. With this win, Tottenham is now sitting number 1 in the Premier League, tied with Liverpool with 20 points in the table through 9 matches played. Continuing on, Manchester United was able to beat West Brom 1-0. Bruno Fernandes was able to score the only penalty kick to help beat West Brom and give the win to Man United. So far, Man United is sitting 10th in the table with 8 matches played. They have 13 points in the table, which is kind of looking embarrassing, but realistically, they're still 1 game away from about 5th place, because that's where Southampton and Everton are, sitting in 5th and 6th, as Everton has played 9 games. But that's what the Premier League is looking like. Jumping to Sunday's Premier League matches, Liverpool was able to beat Leicester City 3-0. Jota and Firmino would end up helping along with, and then Evans would score an own goal for Leicester City. It would be 3 points for Liverpool in the win, and 3 points for them in the table, as they are tied, like I said, with Tottenham, number 1 in the Premier League with 20 points in the table so far. Additionally, Arsenal was able to draw with Leeds United as Pepe picked up a red card in the 51st minute. Arsenal is sitting 11th in the Premier League, sitting with the same amount of points in the table as Manchester United with 1 more game played. Jumping to Saturday's matchups, jumping to the Bundesliga, Bayern Munich, the reigning German champs, were able to tie with Werder Bremen. Eggestein would score the goal for Werder Bremen in the first half. Kingsley Coman scoring the only goal of the game for Bayern in the second half. With this win, Bayern Munich still sits atop the Bundesliga table by 1 point over Borussia Dortmund and Bayer Leverkusen. They have 6 wins, a draw, and a loss on the season. Continuing on throughout the day, RB Leipzig was able to tie with Eintracht Frankfurt. Poulsen and Barkok would score the goals of the day. With this tie, RB Leipzig is now sitting 4th in the table as Dortmund and Leverkusen passed them up thanks to this draw. Borussia Dortmund was able to beat Hertha Berlin 5-2 over the weekend. Cunha would score the only 2 goals for Hertha Berlin. Erling Braut Haaland would score 4 goals for Borussia Dortmund, all in the second half, to help them get their 3 points much needed. And now, because of goal differential, they're sitting 2nd in the Bundesliga over Bayer Leverkusen. But of course, big win for them. But Leverkusen would end up being Arminia Bielefeld. Leon Bailey from Jamaica would score their first goal, and Dragovic would score the second in the second half to help put Leverkusen above and beyond, help them at least move past RB Leipzig in the table. That's what the Bundesliga is looking like. Continuing on to the Italian Serie A. First off, Juventus, it would be Cagliari 2-0. Cristiano Ronaldo was able to score in the 38th and the 42nd minute to help put the Italian champs above and beyond. Right now, they're sitting fourth in the Serie A table, 4 points in the table behind AC Milan so far. And then jumping to Sunday's Serie A matches, looking out to how they were faring. Starting off with the champs, or at least the leaders, AC Milan was able to beat Napoli 3-0. That ended up being a big win for them. Zlatan Ibrahimovic would score 2 goals, one in the first and second half. And with this win, AC Milan still with 20 points in the table, 2 points above Sassuolo. Inter was also able to get a very big win over the weekend, beating Torino 4-2. Romelu Lukaku would score 2 goals for Inter, especially after Sanchez was able to score. And then Laura Martinez scoring in the 90th minute to help the comeback as they were down 1-0 at the very beginning. Big win for Internazionale, or Inter Milan. Inter Milan right now is sitting 5th in Serie A. And like I said, big win for them. Jumping back into Saturday's matchups, but last but not least, taking you into La Liga. Real Madrid was able to draw with Villarreal. Mariano would score in the second minute, but then an own goal from Real Madrid would eventually tie the game up, and both teams would walk away with 1 point. Real Madrid right now is sitting 4th in La Liga with 17 points in the table. They're 6 points behind Real Sociedad, currently in the lead. Also continuing from that day, Atletico Madrid was able to beat Barcelona, Carrasco scoring the only goal of the match. With this loss, FC Barcelona is now sitting 12th in La Liga with 11 points in three wins, 2 draws, and 3 losses through 8 matches in La Liga. And with this win, with 2 less matches played than Real Sociedad, despite being 3 points down, Atletico Madrid is now sitting 2nd in La Liga with this big win. And I think once they play the same amount of games with Sociedad, they will have the best record in La Liga, but until then, we kind of have to wait. Big win for Atletico Madrid, especially picking it up over Barca, kind of flexing their muscles. And they might be the team that wins La Liga this year. And then jumping out to Sunday's matchups, because I don't believe I missed anything else. I believe that's how a lot of the games went, at least the notable ones. But that's this weekend, and there's a good amount of Champions League action to be picked up on Wednesday and Thursday. So, of course, I'll pick up back with you following those Champions League games after they're played. With that said, I want to thank you for listening to all 41 minutes of this piece. It is Monday, November 23rd, 2020, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims. And once again, I want to thank you for listening to this entire piece. And with that said, peace out. I'll catch you tomorrow following the Monday Night Football, and I'll give you updates with what's going on in the NFL season through week 11. With that said, thanks again for listening to my 42-minute piece, and peace out.